with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. I am almost feeling nostalgic for the days when I'd come into work wondering what the top story might be, and if there was one. Right now, this latest Middle East war goes on nastily and unpredictably. A missile strike here, a missile strike there, tit for tat and tat for tit, with bystanders blown up. 3 United States F-15 fighters brought down, apparently by friendly fire. Iranian attacks on the world's largest national gas terminal. Before that, of course, Iran had lost its supreme leader, and among the many questions to ask tonight is, what next there? I am with those who say that any government which kills so many of its own people and hangs dissidents in public and which tries to force women to shroud themselves in dark material deserves no sympathy. But I'm also nervous about the armchair warriors in the West who boldly egg on unarmed protesters in a country whose enemy in the militias and Revolutionary Guard are not only heavily armed, but know that if they lose, their own lives and their families' lives might be in danger. How do you think that might end? If it ends in mass slaughter, what do we in the West do then? That leads to an obvious second question. What is in our own British national interest? Keir Starmer emphasised international law this afternoon, which is why we are not taking part in the US and Israeli attack on Iran, but only defending our own citizens and allies. Is that wise and principled, or is it, as Donald Trump clearly thinks, far too timid? Here's Pete Hegseth, the Defence Secretary in the US, I think, talking about us.
Capable partners are good partners. Unlike so many of our traditional allies who wring their hands and clutch their pearls, hemming and hawing about the use of force.
But in the Commons, the Prime Minister seemed entirely unfazed by that kind of attack.
President Trump has expressed his disagreement with our decision not to get involved in the initial strikes. But it is my duty to judge what is in Britain's national interest. That is what I've done. And I stand by it.
And the war goes on. We are surrounded this evening by a fog of unknowing, and I'm offering no glib predictions tonight. It is possible, if unlikely, that democracy can be imposed solely by bombing from the air, and that the militias put down their guns, and a pro-Western democratic Iran rises like a phoenix from the rubble. If that happened, it would be the biggest victory for the West in my lifetime, demolishing a key ally of both Russia and China. It's equally possible that we are on the edge of a nightmarish implosion of power and civil war in Iran, which will kill huge numbers of decent people with whom we have no argument. So I think all we can do tonight is test the arguments, point out the dangers, and not sound too pumped up or too certain about anything at all. And I'm joined first tonight by the Defence Minister, Al Carnes. Al, thank you very much for joining us. Can I ask you, first of all, about the international law aspect of this? Surely, if Iran is an exporter of terror, killing its own people, on the edge of getting nuclear weapons, that matters more, and we should be alongside the Americans.
So I think we've got to be really nuanced in this. You know, I've served, and I always say, don't ask anyone to do something you wouldn't do yourself. And to employ our forces into harm's way, airmen, airwomen, and individuals across our armed forces, you must have a solid legal basis. Without that, we would find it very difficult to criticise any other autocratic nation for doing the same. And so I think we've made the right decision just recently. We're in a defensive posture all the way up and down the Middle East. And right now, as we're speaking, Andrew, there are pilots probably in fast air at the moment, tracking and intercepting threats that are either a direct threat to our international allies and partners or indeed British citizens who are stranded across the Middle East right now.
But this is a nuanced problem, and we are allowing our bases to be used in what we appear to regard as an illegal war at the moment. So is there not a slippery slope possibility that a missile hits one of our people or, God forbid, kills some of our people? And we are drawn into full-scale attack on Iran alongside Israel and alongside the United States?
America and Israel have struck Iran. Iran's response has been utterly irrational and deeply dangerous. They've struck 10 different countries now. Some countries not involved at all in any way, shape or form. Those targets are everywhere from hotels in Dubai all the way through to airfields and ports all the way along the Middle East. And so they have absolutely broadened out and escalated this. There are strikes in Lebanon and Israel now engaging. We've had drones land in Cyprus. And so I think we're absolutely in our right to take carefully but calculated decisions to ensure our national interests, our allies and partners in the region, and importantly, all those hundreds of thousands of British citizens who maybe listen to this programme, to try and protect them as best we can.
So far, thank God, not many of those missiles seem to have hit the targets that they were intended for. But we also know that Iran has had sleeper cells all around the West, the IRGC involvement. Are you concerned as a government about the possibility of attacks here on the UK?
So I think it's worth sort of extrapolating a little bit on that, Andrew, and you'll know this. Step back. Iran has been involved in every terrorist organisation, probably in the Middle East, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, Iranian-sponsored militias in Iraq, a lethal aid into Iraq when we were fighting there, and indeed Afghanistan. And on top of that, they've supplied Russia with tens of thousands of drones that you see now landing in the Middle East. So am I a fan of the Iranian regime? Absolutely not. But it's really important we separate the two out, the Iranian people from the Iranian regime.
Absolutely. I was asking really about the threat from sleeper cells inside the UK and whether or not we are thinking of raising the threat level.
So that's down to our intelligence agencies in the Home Office. What I will say is that we've disrupted 20 Iranian terrorist threats in this country. And it's just another example of the Iranian regime that has been, I always say, the keystone of instability within the Middle East.
Given what's happened, is it not time at long last to ban the IRGC?
So those discussions will be going on in the central, number 10 government. We'll be tracking it as we move forward, and your decisions will be forthcoming.
What's your view?
Well, I'll take the government view, but to be fair, I'm not actually involved in that discussion. My primary aim has been ensuring all those British citizens and British interests are protected in the Middle East. And I'd just like to make a shout out, Armed Forces personnel doing an amazing job. They are supporting the defensive, almost line backing all the way across the Middle East. And we're working really hard to make sure they can do their job in the most effective way.
Al, one more general question, if you don't mind. We are facing huge threats, as you know, all around the place, from the north, the high north, through to what's going on in Ukraine, through to this new war. Do you think that we are increasing defence spending and reinforcing our military as fast as we need to do?
I've been really clear. We live in probably the most fractious and unstable geopolitical time in my 24 years in the military, and defence spending has gone up. It's going to continue going up over the next 10 years. That speed will be dictated at a later date.
All right, Al Carnes, thank you very much indeed. Listening to that with me in the studio is the former head of the Foreign Office, Lord Simon MacDonald. Simon, welcome to you. This is the nub of the argument tonight is really whether international law is being used to dither, or whether it's really important that we are absolutely clear that we have a legal case before we get involved with the Americans and the Israelis.
In some ways, I can't believe I'm about to say what I'm going to say, Andrew, because throughout my 38 years in the Foreign Office, everything was axed on international law. But right now, international law is not the central point. International law is not what's guiding the President of the United States. That's about power. And we, faced with his use of power, I think we have three choices. We can contort ourselves as though the old world continues. And I think, frankly, that is what the government is doing right now. We can decide to sit on the sidelines, or we can adapt. We can see the world as it is, and we can take a realpolitik view and accept that things are different and we need to behave in a different way.
You think that Keir Starmer has become a contortionist?
On this, yes.
And that's because, in your view, Iran is such a wicked power, has been such a threat in terms of exporting terrorism, and the possibility of it having a nuclear weapon is so close that, frankly, international law doesn't matter as much as decapitating this regime?
It is not the ultimate guide. Certainly not for the President of the United States, and he is the one calling the shots right now. As you've been laying out, Iran has a record domestically and internationally which shows that it is a persistent and continuing threat. So even a contortionist can find a way to support, but our support was strikingly slow.
Well, this contortionist has taken a very big and bold decision in the sense of you don't take on Donald Trump on a subject as important as this without thinking there may be consequences further down the line. If you were still inside the machine, would you be advising him to pick up the phone and apologise?
I mean, leaders don't often apologise to each other, but he needs to talk to the president, he needs to explain himself, and I would urge him to get with the programme.
Get with the programme, and that would involve actually using our bases and our fighters and whatever else we've got to join in the attacks on Iran.
Yes, but another aspect of this, Andrew, is how useful is the United Kingdom to the United States right now? The United States has mounted 2 technically brilliant operations this year without the United Kingdom. Is the United Kingdom still as important to their planning as we were in 2003?
So, going back to the old days, do you look at the situation today and feel that we are drifting into irrelevance as a country?
Well, we have to revalidate ourselves. The rules of the game are changing before our eyes. This president is not interested in Security Council resolutions. He is interested in action on the ground, and he has the capabilities to do it. International law without enforcement is a very fragile thing, and the United States has to date been the main enforcer.
So this is absolutely fascinating. You really think that the British government, the British establishment, has failed to recognise the changes happening in the world?
In a word, yes. I think we have to reassess. Things are fundamentally different. This is not the first example even this year, so we can't say that we've had no warning, but we seem quite slower than the Germans, Australians, for example, Canadians, to reappraise.
Lord MacDonald, fascinating. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. I've rarely heard Keir Starmer, however, be so clear about anything as he was about international law today. But how is this going down across British politics? Let's talk next to LBC's Deputy Political Editor, Aggie Chambray. Aggie, you heard a fascinating analysis there of what Keir Starmer is getting wrong. What do you think the Labour Party thinks?
Well, I think there's a real mix in the Labour Party. As, Andrew, there always is. There are some Labour MPs who feel uncomfortable even with how far Britain has gone. And there are other Labour MPs who feel that, of course, Britain should have gone further and should have gone further sooner. But in that debate that we saw in the Commons today, we had Labour MP after Labour MP asking whether the lessons from the Iraq war had been learnt. And Keir Starmer saying repeatedly that, yes, Britain has learned the lessons of Iraq.
Of course, the Iraq war was very, very different. There were boots on the ground, and there was a plan for regime change and rebuilding democracy and all of that. And President Trump has been very clear this time, this war is not like that. It's a much more limited attempt to take out the leadership of a wicked regime.
It's really interesting you use the word plan there, because that was another word that Keir Starmer used a lot in the comments. And the way he used it in the comments, it sounded like he thought there wasn't really a thought-through plan from Donald Trump. He also said in the comments the government doesn't believe in regime change from the skies. And he said that's one of the lessons from Iraq. There is a viable, thought-through plan with an objective that can be achieved, very much implying that he didn't think the US president had that plan at the moment. And going further once again than we had seen him in those early months in criticising, or at least seeming to criticise the US president.
Aggie, for now, thank you very much. Because I just want to ask Lord MacDonald one last thing about all of that, which is, what do you see happening in terms of the Iranian leadership?
Well, in the first part of this operation, it has, as President Trump has boasted, been decapitated. And all potential replacements know that that is an American capability. So whatever happens next in Iran happens with the knowledge that if this is out with the tolerances of the President of the United States, then America will come back.
So you think, in short, it's unlikely to be a worse Iran as a result, and likely to be a slightly more Western-friendly or Western-cautious Iran?
Right now, I think that is the leading possibility.
All right. Lord MacDonald, Aggie Chambray, thank you both very much indeed. Now, the leader of the Liberal Democrats asked Parliament today, as hundreds of thousands of UK citizens fled the Middle East, why should British taxpayers protect those who live in that region precisely to avoid contributing tax? He's going to be with me next, but the time now, 6:18.
Conflict in the Middle East. Follow Live Player app or the LBC app.
6:19. The United States Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth issued a thinly veiled attack against its pearl-clutching allies today. After that and the President's criticism of our Prime Minister, could this war be yet another strain on the so-called special relationship? Well, Fred Fleitz was Chief of Staff to the National Security Council during Trump's first administration, and he joins us now. Fred, great to have you on the show again. We heard Pete Hegseth, and we've heard rumours also of the President's anger about the dilatory way that the British have given them bases and the general lack of enthusiasm for this war. Just give us a sense of how you feel the British have reacted in terms of Washington.
Well, we were disappointed that the British weren't with us on this attack, but I have to say that I'm encouraged by statements I've heard from a variety of European leaders after this operation took place. It's been very successful. I think regardless of how it was done, it's pretty clear that the death of Supreme Leader Khamenei is a good thing for global security. And I think over time, we're going to get more support from our European leaders. They may not have liked the idea of this or the way it was initiated, but I think they see the light at the end of the tunnel, and the result may be very positive.
So you have some hope, as it were, that Keir Starmer will be alongside in due course?
I thought his statements were promising. I think he seems to be saying, well, we weren't with you, but we're very happy with what's happening. We stand with the Iranian people. And how can he say anything else after the massive demonstrations by ethnic Iranians in London who are just so delighted that this brutal dictator is dead?
And I know the same has been happening in your country as well.
Yes.
But the real problem, I guess, is that we may be at the beginning of this story, not the end of it. And having decapitated the Iranian leadership, is there not a danger of encouraging unarmed pro-democracy protesters in Tehran to take on heavily armed and fairly desperate militias?
No, that's right. I think there are many dangers. Now, you correctly said earlier with a previous guest, this is not going to be like what happened after the second Iraq war. The U.S. is not going to occupy Iraq. It's not going to throw out the government. It's not going to dismiss the military. The Iranian people will have to do that. My hope is that there will be massive and sustained demonstrations that the regime cannot put down, that the security forces have been demoralized, and we will break them, that they'll start surrendering or melting into the population. But look, I'll admit to you, I don't know what the transition is going to be to democracy. It's very possible that there will be armed groups that will try to take control of the country other than the remnants of the Khamenei regime. And there are people who would like to run the country, but they're outside of Iran, and their influence within the country is very limited.
I mean, clearly it would be great if this was a bit like the fall of Ceausescu or one of the communist dictatorships, and it happened quite quickly. But 90 million people, many different ethnic groups, different religions, different languages even, and a very, very heavily armed internal machine of security and repression. Given all of that, I guess the straightforward question is, what if people, rise up in Tehran and Qom and other cities and march for democracy, and they are mown down in their hundreds or their thousands? What do we do then?
I don't have a good answer for that. I think that there is a plan to deal what happens after these attacks. I mean, maybe there will be an effort to go after these security forces. Maybe there'll be an effort to attack the security forces with drones. I don't know, but I think that this has been played out also, but I still think it's going to be very difficult to move from where we are to bring about a democratic state. But Trump's position is, we can't let this regime go on. It is such a severe threat. It's been a war with our country for 47 years. You know the long record of terrorism, killing American troops.
I do. He was very eloquent about that today, Pete Hegseth. But there's one other conundrum here. Sorry, Fred, if I could jump in. There's one other conundrum here, which is the president said, I think rightly, that the United States had already demolished the nuclear program. Demolished was the word he used in those overnight attacks. I think it was Operation Rolling Thunder, it was called at the time. If that's the case, Why was there such urgency to attack again, given that the nuclear talks were still going on in Geneva, even if the Iranians seemed to be stringing things out and being a bit infuriating? Why now?
It appears that despite the ceasefire of last June, Iran had been trying to reconstitute its nuclear and missile programs. I followed the Iranian nuclear program for a long time. I think it's been set back at least 5 years. It will take a long time for Iran to rebuild the facilities it would need to actually make uranium metal to put it into nuclear devices. But the missile program was growing much, much faster. I think that was the real threat. That's why Israel has been pushing for an attack on Iran for several months. And the concern was that they're making 50 to 100 missiles a month. Eventually, they'd have so many that an attack like this wouldn't be possible.
That's absolutely fascinating and makes an awful lot of sense. Fred Fleitz, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And if you've been following the Commons exchanges on the war, you might have heard the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey, raise something that others have wondered about. Why is it that British taxpayers are paying to protect tax exiles in Dubai and elsewhere in the Middle East? Sir Ed joins me now. Ed, I suppose the answer is because they're British.
Yes, we should protect them. I was really clear in the House that we absolutely owe a duty to them. They are British. But I think it's also a duty for the rest of our country that they pay their taxes. And I think many people have been rather alarmed, you've mentioned it yourself, that we are now going to pay for them to be protected, rightly, but they should start paying. I think it's a complete principle that we should all agree with. If they benefit from that protection, they should contribute towards it.
So they're contributing really towards the defence side of public spending. Does this mean some kind of exit tax for people proposing to leave the UK?
There's many ways one could do it. If you look at the way America does it, there's no exit tax. It's how they are taxed on their income. And so we could learn from the American system and get all the details right. But the principle that they should pay if they're benefiting from British armed forces, brave British soldiers and airmen, it surely should be a consensus point.
Well, no, see, it's a consensus in tomorrow's
maybe
newspapers.
Not with Richard Tice.
Maybe not there. Let me ask you about the more general point we've been talking about tonight, which is, I don't know really silly about this, but the Prime Minister has a real dilemma. On the one hand, he believes in international law and doesn't believe that international law allows this attack. But he also knows that Iran is a pretty dangerous place and he doesn't want to get too far away from Donald Trump. How do you think he's played it?
I think relatively well. Let me come to my criticism of it in a minute. But I actually agree with Fred Fleitz when he was talking about the Iranian regime. And when the Prime Minister's talked about the Iranian regime, it's a despicable regime. We shed no tears for the death of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. What he and the IRGC have done across the world with their terrorism, their support for Hamas, for example, on the appalling atrocities on October the 7th, they deserve to be ousted. However, the point you make about international law, it's absolutely critical that that is upheld. There were negotiations. The point you're making to Fred Fleitz, there was no urgency for an attack. And he made that point about the missile production. I have to say, I don't really buy that totally. There should have been those negotiations. They were ongoing. And let's remember, President Trump was the one who got rid of the Obama agreement, which most people who had been involved with that, who'd seen what the investigators who'd gone into Iran to look whether they were abiding by the treaty said they were, that was got rid of by Trump and made us a less safe world.
He said it was a terrible agreement because it was going to allow the Iranians to move fast towards a nuclear bomb of their own, which with their missiles would have made them untouchable.
But he was wrong on that, not for the first time. Obama and many other people, and let's remember Britain, France and Germany were signatories to that whole process, said it was the best way forward. It was a peaceful way forward. Now, of course, there are many Iranians now who are celebrating the death of the Supreme Leader and hope that change will happen. But your point to Fred Fleitz is what will actually happen. There's a danger of civil war in Iran, of huge numbers of people killing, of the highly enriched uranium, the Iranian uranium, falling into the wrong hands. And that's before you look at the regional instability that's been caused. Our allies and partners, who the Prime Minister quite rightly wanting to defend them, they are in terror at the moment. So what has been unleashed by this illegal action is quite frightening. And where it goes, nobody knows. As Fred Flights had to agree, there is no plan. That is unacceptable from the President of the United States. There was no plan after the Iraq invasion, and look what happened there. No plan now. They're not learning from history.
So you think a civil war, an absolute sort of implosion in that part of the world is still possible?
Andrew, I don't know. I was listening to Simon MacDonald, and you were the former Permanent Secretary to the FCO. He was more hopeful. Maybe there is a moderate leader, a more Western-focused leader who will come and take over. But with all the vested interest in Iran and the complexities, the different ethnic groups that you referred to, I think this is highly reckless and highly risky.
It may be that we are on a sort of slippery slope where we end up effectively with the Americans and the Israelis. If there was a vote in the House of Commons to use our bases for offensive operations against Iran, how would the Liberal Democrats vote?
Almost certainly against. The only caveat I have is we would like to hear the government's argument, what legal advice they have. But I'm afraid the idea that it's good for our country to be dragged in to another war in the Middle East. We saw what happened last time. The Liberal Democrats opposed that Iraq war. We didn't accept the government's argument then. I very much doubt we'll accept the government's argument if they were to try to make it.
Sir Ed Davey, thank you very much indeed for coming in. The Home Secretary has unveiled big shake-ups to the asylum system, and they are not the swerve to the left that many people were expecting after the Greens' big by-election win last week. We're going to talk about that, but the time now 6:30, and Matt Hewitt has your news headlines.
Donald Trump has called the military campaign against Iran necessary to defuse the colossal threat to America.
Play LBC.
6:33. The Home Secretary has announced changes to the asylum system, and it is not the turn to the left that many Labour MPs expected would follow the Green success at the by-election last week. Let's hear now from LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark, who was with the Home Secretary in Denmark last week. Natasha.
Andrew, yes, as you say, in any other week, I think we'd probably be having wall-to-wall coverage about the impact of the Prime Minister, his political future after losing the Gorton and Denton by-election last week. But as it happens, he's been sort of saved by international events, hasn't he? And we are told that he's going to be at the PLP tonight answering questions from MPs in the wake of that loss. And of course, on Iran, we've been hearing from him in the House of Commons today. But as you say, there's been a debate raging within the Labour Party about which way to turn after this by-election result, whether they now need to pivot towards the Greens instead of just fighting reform. So as you say, I went with the Home Secretary to Denmark to find out a bit more about their asylum system, their immigration system. I spoke to her last week before those by-election results were in. However, I did ask her which way the Labour government should turn, whether we should be warding off the Greens or reform.
We've got to deliver, and we've got to think of the answers that are right for the country and not for particular groups, because I think the country, including people from every type of group, will follow a government that shows leadership, that does the right thing and that can deliver.
But she was very much doubling down on her asylum plans, Andrew. She's not backing away, despite concerns that I'm hearing, and I'm sure you're hearing them too, that MPs, or at least some of them, are not happy with some of them, including making refugee status temporary, as indeed has come in today, but also some of the measures which are going to be retrospective to try to impact the so-called Boris wave of people who have already come into this country. Andrew, I'm told that there are already 40 MPs that could be rebelling on these migration changes when they come to votes in the House of Commons. She's brought in the first of those rules today. Is she still convinced her plan is the right one? Yes, she is. I asked her whether she had any message for those Labour MPs who may be prepared to rebel.
We're progressing full steam ahead with our reforms, and I'm already making those changes on moving to a temporary model of refugee status in our country.
A characteristically forthright Shabana Mahmood, but with Keir Starmer's authority in the party coming down a bit, it's going to be harder to fend off those rebellions, isn't it?
Yes, I think it absolutely will, but she is convinced that these changes to the asylum system, many of which are modelled on the Denmark model, which has been quite successful in driving their asylum claims down to a 40-year low. She thinks the public agree with her, and although she may not be sort of the leadership contender, Andrew, that many people are sort of putting her up against, against. There are many that are close to her within her own team that think that she is doing what is right for the country, that she is doing what is supported in terms of a sort of more right-wing attitude, which she feels is very addressed. So I do think that this is probably something that Keir Starmer will be able to get through, but I don't imagine those rebels will go down without a fight.
On any other day, an absolutely huge story, and a very important one today as well. Natasha, thank you so much for that. Many people listening will be hostile to any British involvement in any kind in the war that's going on. One man who I think represents that view is Jeremy Corbyn, recently confirmed as the leader of your party. He may not want the UK to be involved in the conflict, but did he agree the Iranian regime was evil and had to fall?
I think it's got awful human rights record, an awful record in the treatment of its people, and I hope there is obviously a peaceful future for the Iranian people. What I'm not convinced of is that you're going to bomb any change out of it. That's my difference.
Because it could be argued, perhaps weirdly, that assassinating the leader, the supreme leader in this case, is a more moral thing to do than actually to invade a country with boots on the ground.
Well, it doesn't seem to have had the effect that they thought it was going to have. And I'm not sure that the Trump regime fully understands the structure of the politics of Iran. It is not simple. In a sense, the Ayatollah is obviously known as the supreme leader, but there's also several parallel political structures, including the president. And it is this sort of complicated mosaic of power structures that I'm not sure people outside Iran fully understand.
So to be absolutely clear, you think this kind of attack will not produce democracy in Iran?
I don't think it'll have the effect they think it will at all. I think it will have two. One will be some people, and that's been shown already, were probably quite happy that it is an assassination had taken place. But then I saw pictures on Al Jazeera and others of thousands of people turning out in memorial of him. But I also think that a lot of people will just be appalled. Their country is under bombardment. School children are being killed. Civilian structures being taken out, and large numbers of people are going to lose jobs and homes and so on. And they don't want that. And so my urging to the Prime Minister just now in Parliament was that there must be a role now for somebody to step in. The UN don't seem willing to do it, to at least try and call a halt to this and get them back into the talks. Last Friday in Geneva, we were informed by both sides, both Iran and the USA, that the deal was within reach.
Do you have any ideas as to who this intermediator might be?
Obviously, the UN should be the number one call of it. Whether both sides would accept the UN, I don't know. They should. If not, it would have been Qatar or Oman. But since they're now
attacked themselves,
now being bombed themselves, I would have thought it's a bit unlikely.
You have been, I think it's fair to say, from time to time, a critic of the Prime Minister. He is now under huge pressure from the right of politics and from the United States for saying that Britain will not, for the time being, be part of the attack on Iran, and that international law is absolutely sacrosanct. To that extent, are you pleased with what he's doing?
Well, I listened very carefully to his statement and for the last hour and a half of the questions put to him. And the more he was questioned, the more the story seemed to unravel. He started off by saying that he was wishing to abide by international law, good, and that Britain would not be involved in the attacks on Iran, but then went on to say that in the event of there being a defensive retaliatory attack on Iran, British bases could be used, including ones in the UK, as well as potentially, as I see it, the RAF base in Akrotiri.
So it's a slippery slope in your view?
I'm quite unclear what the position actually is. It seems to me that within a few days, should this war go on, then we will actually be as involved as anybody else. The Spanish government, however, have been much clearer on this. They just said absolutely no way. And the US then withdrew its fighter planes from Spain and moved them to Germany.
Do you think this is a moment when, in a sense, we have to break with the United States? Because we were not consulted in any way, as far as I can tell. It's not like the Iraq War, where we were engaged in the whole process running up to it, and then it was boots on the ground. It's very different.
Yeah, both the Gulf War and the Iraq War Britain was very heavily consulted and very involved all along. I mean, I totally oppose both, but that's not the point. The point is there was a consultation. And it looks as though what happened was the talks were proceeding in Geneva on Friday, coming back this week, and then 12 hours later, Trump just announces this bombardment's going to take place. And Britain wasn't even consulted. The Prime Minister was then called at, 4 o'clock in the morning or something and told, are you with us or not? And he said he would abide by international law. So it seems to me that we need a much stronger statement from the British government saying we're not involved. We haven't had that.
In your sort of darkest worry, what do you think happens next?
Darkest worries are that the bombardment of Iran gets worse. There is a bombardment of the nuclear reactor in Iran. There is a nuclear reactor. It doesn't mean they've got nuclear weapons, but there is a nuclear reactor. And that Iran bombs the ammonia reactor in Israel. So you end up with potentially nuclear explosion and nuclear fallout, which would affect millions of people across the region. I think the sense of anger about this war is going to be huge. And the people that are primarily going to be blamed for this are actually the US for not being capable of seeing through negotiations that could have brought about, yes, a agreement on nuclear weapons, but maybe could have brought about, ultimately helped to bring about some changes in Iran.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now, discussing the collapse of the traditional centre of British politics, let's hear from a leading environmental campaigner who has in the past been an important donor to Labour, Dale Vince, founder of Ecotricity. Dale, thank you very much indeed for joining me tonight. I have one overwhelming question for you, really, which is after the success of the Greens in Denton and Gorton, whether you are considering switching your support from Labour to them.
Evening, Andrew. Anyway, good to be back on the show. That question has been overwhelmingly since the election result. Actually, I've been asked by everybody the same question. I can understand why, but my answer is no. My position hasn't changed. I still think that Labour have got a job to do, got a massive mandate, got a manifesto to deliver, and I want Keir Starmer to get on and do it.
So you would think that the differences between the party, whether it's over open borders or NATO or drugs or whatever, still incline you more towards Keir Starmer's party than Zach Polanski's?
Well, it's not that so much. I mean, I haven't given a lot of thought to that. I think legalizing all drugs is a problematic, broad sweep statement to make. I think it has to be much more nuanced than that. We should legalize some. We should end the war on drugs. It isn't working. That's one thing. Open borders, no, I'm not a fan of that. NATO isn't what it used to be, so that's a nuanced kind of discussion as well. But it's not that at all. Labour simply has a massive mandate, perhaps one of the biggest in my lifetime, only 18 months ago, and a manifesto, made some progress on it, but there's a lot more to do. I just don't think that any of the recent scandals or the by-election result are a reason for Keir Starmer to stand down.
And indeed, today we saw him standing up to President Trump in a fairly ballsy way. We know that one of the big sort of underlying arguments and tussles going on at the moment is the Americans trying to put huge pressure on the Labour government to change its policy on net zero and start drilling for oil and gas again, and threatening that if that doesn't happen, if energy prices remain high in the UK, we simply won't have any part of the AI bonanza and all those data centres and the rest of it. In your mind, is that the great sort of tussle going on?
Well, I think one thing I'd say is that it's great to have a prime minister that actually stands up to the Americans. I'm not sure, again, in my lifetime I've ever seen that happen. And the last time we were bullied into a war, it was the Iraq war, and we killed 500,000 Iraqis for weapons that didn't exist. This war's no different. Keir Starmer's doing precisely the right thing. Trump likes to threaten all kinds of stuff. I'm not sure we want American data centers in here any more than we want American tech dominating our lives. America cannot be trusted. They've shown it since Trump got re-elected. They switch off the financial system. There are problems with Microsoft for UN rapporteurs that get on the wrong side of Trump. This American tech has woven itself into our lives. And I think Europe needs to break away from America, develop its own software, its own data centers, its own hardware, military hardware included, because we can't trust America anymore. And we can see that very clearly.
You strike me as a guy who knows what he thinks, Dale. In that context, what do you think Labour got wrong in Manchester in that by-election? What is the message that's not getting through, and how can they improve it?
Well, I think Labour have done some good things, but haven't communicated them very well. I think the right-wing press are very effective at communicating the bad things, the missteps, the U-turns and that kind of stuff. But I think overwhelmingly, my view is that after 14 years of Tory rule, a lot of which was disastrous, the public gave a massive majority to Keir Starmer because they want to change, big, bold change. And we didn't get it. And I think most people in our country are disappointed. And these are protest votes. The two by-elections, every poll you see is a protest vote. That's why Reform, really rather improbably, are riding so high. The Greens are riding so high as well. People in the country are just like registering a protest. They want to see more. So I think Keir Starmer's job and his opportunity is to get on and do that.
So it's delivery more than it's rhetoric.
Yeah, but delivery has to come with better comms. You know, there are good things that have been done. They aren't being talked about. There are good things that are coming. They aren't being talked about. The things that haven't been done that I think should include reforming the energy system. If we propose 3 reforms for that, we could halve electricity bills. And I think also we should ban political donations to make sure our politics is clean and appears to be clean. But right now, just coming back to energy, gas prices have taken off because of this conflict. Just a few years ago, it happened with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Our bills quadrupled because of a thing called the link between the price of gas and the price of green energy. We must break that link, or within a few more months, we might be facing tripling energy bills once more. And last time it cost the country £50 billion. We shouldn't allow it to happen again.
And I've seen, I think today, the liquid gas price has risen for the 3-month delivery 50%. And I think 20% for the short term. We've seen oil going up 19-20%. So we are heading for another energy price crisis if something isn't done.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly right. And it impacts our electricity bills. It puts up the price even improbably, and your listeners will find this hard to believe, but it puts up the price of the wind and the sun, energy made in our own country. Because we have the link, we let the global price of gas set the price of wind energy and solar energy that we make here in our own country. And that's why we're so exposed to global fossil markets.
Dale Vince, thank you very much indeed. As ever, really, really interesting to talk to you. Good luck. Thank you so much. Coming up, more on Iran and a discussion about the key warning signs to look out for from 2 stroke survivors. But the time now, 6:48.
Coming up at 7.
6:50. I'd like now to go back to the top story and my interview with the former head of the Foreign Office, Lord Simon MacDonald. A little earlier in the show, he told me we had to fundamentally change our approach to international law as a country and get with America's programme. Just listen to this.
In some ways, I can't believe I'm about to say what I'm going to say, Andrew, because throughout my 38 years in the Foreign Office, my everything was axed on international law. But right now, international law is not the central point. International law is not what's guiding the President of the United States. That's about power. And we, faced with his use of power, I think we have 3 choices. We can contort ourselves so the old world continues. And I think, frankly, that is what the government is doing right now. We can decide to sit on the sidelines, or we can adapt. We can see the world as it is, and we can take a realpolitik view and accept that things are different and we need to behave in a different way.
You think that Keir Starmer has become a contortionist?
On this, yes.
And that's because, in your view, Iran is such a wicked power, has been such a threat in terms of exporting terrorism, and the possibility of it having a nuclear weapon is so close that, frankly, international law doesn't matter as much as decapitating this regime.
It is not the ultimate guide. Certainly not for the President of the United States, and he is the one calling the shots right now. As you've been laying out, Iran has a record domestically and internationally which shows that it is a persistent and continuing threat. So even a contortionist can find a way to support, but our support was strikingly slow.
Well, this contortionist has taken a very big and bold decision in the sense of you don't take on Donald Trump on a subject as important as this without thinking there may be consequences further down the line. If you were still inside the machine, would you be advising him to pick up the phone and apologise?
I mean, leaders don't often apologise to each other, but he needs to talk to the President, he needs to explain himself, and I would urge him to get with the programme.
get with the program, and that would involve actually using our bases and our fighters and whatever else we've got to join in the attacks on Iran.
Yes, but another aspect of this, Andrew, is how useful is the United Kingdom to the United States right now? The United States has mounted 2 technically brilliant operations this year without the United Kingdom. Is the United Kingdom still as important to their planning as we were in 2003?
So, going back to the old days, do you look at the situation today and feel that we are drifting into irrelevance as a country?
Well, we have to revalidate ourselves. The rules of the game are changing before our eyes. This president is not interested in Security Council resolutions. He is interested in action on the ground, and he has the capabilities to do it. International law without enforcement is a very fragile thing, and the United States has to date been the main enforcer.
So this is absolutely fascinating. You really think that the British government, the British establishment, has failed to recognise the changes happening in the world?
In a word, yes. I think we have to reassess. Things are fundamentally different. This is not the first example even this year, so we can't say that we've had no warning, but we seem quite slower than the Germans, Australians, for example, Canadians, to reappraise.
Lord Simon MacDonald there. Now, it's crucial when we're talking about issues like the war in the Middle East that we hear from people who are among the most affected, who have direct experience and insight to bring us. So now let's speak to Ramin Foghani, the Iranian-born political scientist whose uncle was arrested and killed by the Iranian regime for allegedly being a British spy. Ramin, thank you very much indeed for joining me tonight. What was your reaction when you heard that Ayatollah Khamenei had been killed?
Hi, Andrew. Thank you for having me. Well, I think the instant reaction was shock, like anybody else. Nobody was expecting that. This was extremely bold, history-changing action that the United States and Israel took. So I think for a few hours, it was very difficult to digest that. I couldn't believe the news. I was refreshing different analysis to see if this has actually happened. And as we noticed a few hours later, Israelis and Americans and then the country itself confirmed that.
Your family, I think, clearly suffered under the Islamic Republic, but has also suffered and had a tough time under the Shah's regime before that. In that context, I'm wondering what you hope, fear, expect comes next for Iran, because it's a very complicated situation there.
Yes, I think, putting it mildly, it is a very complex situation inside the country and in the region. And it wouldn't be exaggerating to say that it is affecting the globe, and it is going to affect the world in an extensive way. What do I hope for the country? Like anybody else in this world, I hope for the people to have a normal life, to have prosperity, to have freedoms, to have democracy, all the things that we are enjoying here in West.
Can I ask, sorry to jump in, but we saw that very, very brave protest movement by Iran's women a bit over a year ago, and we've had lots and lots of pro-democracy demonstrations since then, some of them put down with remarkable brutality and, innocent leaders of the regime, opponents of the regime, hanged in public. What do you think the prospects are now for a democratic uprising or revolution actually being successful without mass slaughter?
Going to your last point, I think will be, unfortunately, not without bloodshed. This regime won't leave without bloodshed, won't leave the people to gain control of the country that they own without bloodshed. But look, this generation, the generation post 79, they haven't seen anything else if they haven't left the country. This is all that they know. And it is very brave of them. I think that would be, to put it very, very lightly, to call them brave for what they are trying to achieve. But I think it is very, very difficult for them to achieve what they want without unfortunately losing many lives.
Is there a danger of Iran starting to break up and seeing civil conflict between different groups?
That is certainly a danger. The country is formed by multiple ethnicities. It has a very complex history. But I think the people have a unified identity under the Iranian umbrella. So I can only cross my fingers for such eventuality do not happen, because it will be very disastrous for the country and for the region, yes, as a whole.
And looking across the range of different kinds of Iranian leaders just now, of course, many of them now been killed, but religious leaders, leaders inside the militia, leaders inside the IRGC, do you see anyone in particular emerging to replace the Ayatollah?
Well, the regime will try to bring a new supreme leader. That is for sure. There are legal mechanisms for that considered within the constitution. But will we have overthrow of the current regime and a new liberal democracy that is based on secular ideas and accepting various ideologies, religions, and ways of life? I really hope for that.
Right. Okay. Ramin Farghani, we're all hoping for that. Thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC tonight. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can also stay up to date with all the latest news, videos and opinion. Download it for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew.